to the Strategic News Service 2025 Predictions Reveal. I'm Berit Anderson, the COO of Strategic News Service and Future in Review. And I've been getting a lot of emails from all of you sharing your excitement about today. So we are going to dive in. We're a timely crew here, and we're going to get things started. We are also recording this meeting, you should know. Please keep yourself muted throughout. You will have a chance to ask questions at the end of the call, but we want to make sure that at least this conversation is not interrupted by any noises that may be going on outside of or near your workspace. But with that, I would like to start by introducing Mark Anderson. Mark is the founder and CEO of Strategic News Service and Future in Review. He founded SNS in 1995, and his annual predictions have a 95.44% publicly graded accuracy rating. In 2003, he launched the Future in Review conference, named the best technology conference in the world by The Economist. He is also the founding CEO of Pattern, creator of the Pattern Discovery Engine, inventor of resonance theory, and author of The Pattern Future. Sitting around twiddling his thumbs most of the time, he has two of them. I've seen them. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Berit.
Great to be here with you today.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
So, Mark, we're going to start off by talking about the state of the world today. I think many of our members are familiar with some of our thoughts about the state of the world, especially with regard to CRINK.
Yes.
And I want to start off by asking you, in your assessment of this landscape, what is different about CRINK now as opposed to CRINK 5 years ago?
So, Berit, you and others who are members will probably recall that we had a theme last year at this time for the future of 2024. And that theme was something like chaos levels of play. And that, boy, was that true. I can't think of a more chaotic year geopolitically and economically than last year, really, in recent history. So now we're in a different stage of that same story. And the theme for this year, which harks to your question, is the CRINK effect, a two-front world in an all-fronts war. And here I'm quoting the term that Evan Anderson made up, the all-fronts war. So this is, I think, exactly where we sit today at the end of this year, and it will certainly be what we're going through in the coming year. And so the CRINK experience is radically more advanced. The treaty is much tighter in terms of political treaties and in terms of military cooperation. Various military operations around the world, and from the Arctic to the Antarctic, to Taiwan, to off the US coast, could include drones over New Jersey even. And so there's an awful lot of cooperation happening every day. It's hard to imagine these guys aren't talking to each other on a daily basis with many, many layers of planning. And so I'm not kidding. It is a two-front world in an all-fronts war. That's the world we live in today, and that's the world we'll be living in this coming year. So CRINK has gone from being an interesting geopolitical idea to a major adversary in a very, not only is it all fronts, but it's a very aggressive shift in posture by CRINK.
And what are some of the ways that you're seeing that show up?
Every single way.
Let's talk a little bit about the all fronts part of things. Just in the new, I mean, you mentioned drones are the New Jersey drones are a possible thing. We don't know, but do know a lot about. We're seeing a lot more aggressive spying on behalf of China. A lot of different spies being stopped on the way out of the country. What else are you seeing?
Well, if you mention different levels of, you can say contest, you call it combat, I don't know. This is an all-fronts war. At each level, you're seeing more aggression. So if you asked Russian airplane invasions of US territory, yes. If you said Russian and Chinese planes together invading, yes. If you said Chinese just sent 90, for the first time, 90 planes against Taiwan, invading their territory, yes. If you said Chinese ships in the South Sea, which is what they call it, being more aggressive with the Philippines Army or Navy, yes. If you said territorial aggression in general, absolutely, by every country in CRINK. If you said more military cooperation on the ground, obviously, yes. More the interdependency of money and that money is being put to military use, absolutely. If you see more preparations for future warfare, which you pointed out, Barrett, yes. So it's hard not to find anything with the word China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea in it, which doesn't hark to CRINK and which doesn't also include expansion of activities. Spying is
Okay.
one of them, cyber behavior, cyber attacks, huge cyber attacks. We know that Verizon and all of everything we're doing right now is probably being reviewed by the Chinese. So it's really a totally aggressive posture compared to a preparatory posture before.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about China, the first country in that alliance.
Yes. So when we look at CRINK, there's two reasons why it starts with a C. One is it worked out phonetically to have the C in the front. But China is, I think of this as China's operation. China, despite having an imploding domestic economy, has launched out on something we mentioned in SNS not too long ago. There is a multi-year plan in place, which we just saw really launch. You have to go back 3 years to March 2020, which, as you know, Barrett, has two meanings. One is what we're calling the export attack. But of course, March 2020 is also when the world became aware of the bioweapons attack, which I'm saying because now we've got a congressional report, bipartisan, saying what we've been saying since the very beginning. So fascinating timing, could be coincidental, but I don't think it was. And that was keynoted in a sense by the launch of the attack, the export attack, using what we had been warning about for 5 years at least, EVs. And add cars, so there's EVs and hybrids, and then all cars, gasoline cars, from at least 30 companies that had been groomed, subsidized, prepped, fed stolen IP, and ready to go with market share into the world economy and wipe out the enemy. The enemy is us and German car companies and Japanese car companies. You'll have noticed that Honda and Nissan are talking about merging. Guess why? Because of this attack. So, German car companies are shuttering plants for the first time in my memory. Why is that? Same thing. So this is something that is the point of the spear of the export attack, all of which began many years ago, but ramped up crazy faction in March of 3 years ago.
Okay, let's talk about Russia. I want to make sure we get through all this in time.
Sure, you bet.
What's going on in Russia?
Russia, you can take two sides here. When you look at Russia, you know what their story is. Ukraine had always earlier been part of Russia. It was a breadbasket of Russia. It's culturally, for many, many years, part of Russia. But what you really see today is the CRINK role. And it's hard not to appreciate that their aggression is not just in Ukraine, but worldwide. And you have to kind of tip the hat, I think. If you go back to the IRA, the Internet Research Agency that Prigozhin created in the basement of some St. Petersburg office, the effect of misinformation and disinformation, and I'm speaking to the choir here because Barrett's like the world expert on this, but the effectiveness going back 2 or 3 elections of that tiny operation was so great, no matter how you want to measure it, that it appears that Russia has doubled down. Or
So, yeah,
multiplied
so
50,
mhm.
So I believe Putin had to kill Prigozhin. That was his view. But at the same time, what a great success that basement was. And if you were Putin, why wouldn't you multiply by 1,000? And I believe he did. This is my belief. I can't prove this, but I certainly feel like I'm seeing the patterns of this level of misinformation, disinformation, and dividing the enemy everywhere possible, and changing governments and so forth worldwide. And it's hard not to imagine that there isn't some operation in every basement in St. Petersburg tagged out with you take care of Central Africa. We saw that happen in what, 2 months? It went from being pro-West to every country, almost every country in the Central Africa. Suddenly it's pro-Russia with Wagner Group right behind. And so these are really big movements, pretty much driven by disinformation, as far as I can tell.
Some
That
of the some of the
change
report some of the reporting that I've seen indicates that uh, Russian agents are now paying actually people throughout Nigeria and Africa, which would make sense because that aligns with the Wagner Group's movements throughout Africa, to do the same thing, which kind of helps avoid the detection
yeah,
of Russian IP addresses. So I
yes,
think that there's an export of that strategy that's been going on
absolutely. It's
around the
really
world.
interesting. Worldwide.
Okay, let's talk about Iran.
Well, it's not a good week for Iran. And it's hard to feel sorry for them. So, at a time when everybody was pretty busy, including yours truly, being very critical of Netanyahu, I guess we have to give military credit where it's due. Look what happened. And I believe this is part of the Israeli bombing of Syria, but it's certainly part of the Israeli fight with Hamas, Hezbollah, and if you want to add the Houthis in there. Um, and I think everybody missed this. If the CIA missed this, I think everyone missed this. Suddenly there's no Syria. Wow. And I think we're a bit naive here. No, I don't doubt that um, the folks in Idlib were planning this for 9 years or 10 years. They were ready. And I don't really doubt that Israel knew that by removing all the proxy warrior states, or at least degrading them mightily, certainly that will have an effect of what happened. U.S. was supportive in that, but less so. And what do you have left here now? It's pretty interesting. Syria's disappearance is Iran's loss because of all of what I just said. And if you ask today, what is Iran in terms of military? It's a shadow of what it was 2 months ago, a tiny shadow. And so, even though we have already written that we think that Iran already has nuclear weapons, forget about their threats to get them in 2 weeks. I think that Iran now is much humbled and defanged and ready to negotiate with the West in a way they were not 2 months ago.
Okay, North Korea, the final.
Let me
Okay,
add one more little piece there.
okay.
This makes them ripe for a revolution. And a lot of things do. Women's rights, a lot of issues inside Iran where the public is unhappy. But times like this, when they've been um, so shamed internationally and so run down militarily, is a high risk time for the government. And it's not hard to picture this. I called it a zipper in my printed version of today's thing. Picture a zipper where Iran is the beginning of the zipper and they fail. If Iran went down, if there were a revolution overnight, not in Syria, but now in Iran, who'd be next? And I think it would be Russia. So I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not saying this is a prediction. I'm just saying this is the current state of the world, where if you take CRINK and unzip it, which you could do, Russia would be next. All right, who's next?
Yeah, North Korea. Okay.
The Indiana of China. Yeah, so North Korea, there's a lot of talk about China's upset because they're dealing directly with Russia. I think who I call the little fat guy, I think that he saw an opportunity for North Korea to cut its umbilical cord of control from China. China supplies about 90% of North Korea's energy, but not now. I think now they can get energy from Russia. And certainly Russia wants to have what they have to offer, which is bullets, head count, talk of 100,000 soldiers heading their way toward Ukraine. And already people are spotting, like anti-tank weapons and so forth, munitions. So this is a new deal for North Korea. It gives them a new standing independent of China. They don't ever do anything that China doesn't approve. So I think that's a foolish comment by the American media when they say that China's upset. But I do think it's interesting. I think China is giving full approval and they're getting more autonomous. Yeah.
What that indicates to me is that China is very invested in Russia not losing in Ukraine, because
Yes.
that would weaken the entire appearance of the entire alliance, right? Why would they be open to that? It's because of that factor.
Did I say zipper?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be part of the zipper. Yeah.
All right. So on top of all of this, we also have let's go. The next country in the list is Germany. So we're going to move into the West. This is not part of the CRINK alliance, but these are really important nations that affect the international global order. So,
Yes.
Mark, tell us about Germany. What's going on there?
Well, when we watched,
How are they doing?
not great. When we watched Russia and China go after NATO, hammer and tongs, China's job was to do to Germany what they did. I suspect that there are a lot of people who had a big banquet at the end of this year celebrating the damage done to Germany by both China and Russia. So Russia was responsible for driving 1 million Syrians into Russia itself, into Germany itself,
Germany, yeah.
destroying Angela Merkel's reputation, who was the most famous, long-lived leader in the West overnight, and in general creating havoc in all of the NATO countries. At the same time, China was busy doing something very economically strategic, which was sending this huge export attack into the heart of Germany, and it worked. So I can't explain to anybody why the German car companies are as blind and stupid as they are with regard to their own self-interests, but they seem to be persisting in this even today. And they're going to go down for the count, for the count, for the count. They're going down. And you just watch it every single day. It's got to be very frustrating for intelligent Germans. So this has finally been opposed by the EU, who actually turned Germany down when they tried to block the vote against tariffs against the EVs coming out of China. So Germany was shamed by the EU. They ran the EU for 20 years. That day is gone. And now you've got them shamed politically. The government was thrown out yesterday, 2 days ago. It's in shambles. They don't know where they're going. You've got the AfD, the right wing, growing as fast as they can in terms of the coalition that may be formed next. It'll be the CDU probably instead of the SPD coming in to make that coalition. It's a mess. It's a big mess on every scale. I like Germany, so I feel sorry for them, except that this is self-inflicted. Angela refused to believe that Russia would cut off the gas to Germany, and of course they did. And she was wrong. And let's forget Angela for a while. And then I think Scholz was too slow to respond to the economic problems, and certainly to stand up to the three companies, the German companies, that now are, to me, an afterthought. And Germany needs to find a new reason for being economically, and they haven't found it yet. They need a leader who can help them find that. Otherwise, they keep going down. It's a sad story.
Okay, UK.
Talking about not learning from the past, I think it was 15 minutes after the new labor leader got on bended knee and prayed to King Xi that he would just give him some more money if he were nice to China. Now, David Cameron brought this act to the forefront a long time ago. It did not end well for the UK. Why would Labour do that again? And I think I would call it craven behavior. The UK had finally figured out how to be independent of China after real misbehavior by prior leaders purely for Chinese money. And now here we go again. It's embarrassing, and it's also suicidal. I hope somebody will take Keir Starmer aside and show him David Cameron movies and then tell him to stop. That's where they are today.
All right, let's talk about one of our Asian allies, Japan.
Also a new government, and too new to make a comment about, but I mentioned this thing where when you see Japan creating a Honda, if they're going to do it, a Honda Nissan, where it's going to be merger, That's them speaking as loudly as they ever speak. That is them talking to the world saying, we are terrified of the Chinese onslaught against our top companies. And they are an economics driven culture. So, the Keiretsu of Japan are how they think and work, at least on the business side, and they must be terrified. Certainly, car sales are falling, just as they are for the US, just as they are for every non Chinese company in China. Too bad. That was part of a long term plan. We've been writing about it for years, maybe many years, and there's no excuse not to have known this was coming. It's like Tim Cook. Hey, Tim, wake up. Wake up, Tim. We've been writing this for Tim's sake for 5 years. And it's still like, well, they're my friends, No, they're not. They're not your friends. And so here we go with these. This is, if you recall, Made in China 2025. Oh, here comes 2025. Well, the whole point of that was no dependence on any outside country except everything's made inside China. So I don't care what business you're in, your time is done here. And whether Walmart wants to start some new thing with a new partner, just don't embarrass us, please. Wake up, smell the coffee, protect your shareholders, protect your employees, take care of your people, and stop dreaming about what you hope will be in a world of what will be.
All right, and finally, Australia in this list.
Yeah,
There's
well,
lots of questions in the chat about other countries, which we can come back to during the Q&A, but we're starting with just this list.
Albanese is not somebody who has I say this carefully. I've been friends with 3 of the past 5 prime ministers of Australia. I haven't seen Albanese show the backbone that is needed by the prime minister of the country, which has been more overridden by Chinese front offices than any other country in the world, and where they have actually elected Chinese spies to their government. And then Clive Hamilton outed them, and then they had to throw them out of the country. This is pretty embarrassing if you're from, that's kind of my favorite country is Australia. But again, wake up, deal with the world as it is, not as you hope it would be. Don't sell out your country for money. That's never a winning poker hand. Don't do it. And I'm deeply concerned that that's what Albanese is up to.
So all of this, there's been a lot of unsettlement lately
Mm-hmm.
in governments around the world. Let's
Yes.
talk about that.
Well, so now Berit and I prepared for this question, and we put it in the middle of this program because we wanted to kind of hide it there, so you kind of forget we talked about this by the end. But just as with Central Africa not so long ago, we have seen in the West a destruction of a destabilization of the Western governments uniformly across the world, and with the effect that whichever country you want to bring up, if it was part of the Western alliance, whatever that might mean to you, there's a new leader or no leader. And the U.S. is kind of like no leader right now. So, we're kind of without a fully functioning president, I would say. And the one who's coming up is, we don't know what he's going to do, except that he seems to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Russia. So he's not doing anything nasty to Russia. But in general, from Germany last week, UK a month ago, Japan 3 weeks ago, wherever you turn, you've got either missing in action or brand new help, often more favorable to Russia. And it's hard not to think that Russia and their gigantic disinformation campaign wasn't deeply involved in getting us to that state. And at the same time, you then have to ask, well, how does CRINK feel about that? Very, very happy. And then you have to ask yourself, is there a jeopardy situation here? If you were running CRINK and you had just succeeded in what I just described, and it had been done on purpose, after your celebratory champagne dinner, what would you do next? And this is not a prediction, this is just an observation. When countries are weak or when their leaders are weak, or when they're unprepared or they have somebody new, this is a time of higher risk for those countries. And unfortunately, this is a time when that is true for every single member of the West, including France. So I think it's a very high risk moment. And again, this is not a prediction. I don't want to scare anybody, but I think it's a good time to be extremely prepared if you're in the governments of all of our friends to be ready for something extra nasty or aggressive to happen because of this general unpreparedness. That's all I'll say about that.
All right. Let's talk about technology. On that note,
Yeah.
tell us about your major areas of technical interest and contest.
Well, so there's a lot of good news, I think, on the tech side, and that's where most of our members are interested. Chips is great news, I think. So we made a big mistake, now we realize it, of giving so much technical information to TSMC when they live, 100 yards from mainland China, and when everyone at TSMC probably has vacation time in China. So, or even invests in SMIC and other things, that are contrary to our interests in mainland China. So that's over, and that's great news. So, hats off to Biden and his administration, and I think to the prior Trump administration for taking the same basic attitude, and probably will continue to do so. Uh, let's bring back manufacturing and technology to the United States. Great idea, and chips is the most important part of that story, without any doubt. And so the willingness to spend serious money to that end is great, and the willingness to create other help of various types on the state level and on the federal level, fantastic. And that's happening at a time, it just so happens, which is not about politics, but which is a lot about the changes in the industry, where we have, if you took every cloud customer, well, let me back up. NVIDIA, as many people may know, in a sense, only has 4 customers. Now they have 1 million customers, and this morning or yesterday morning they announced they're going for small business. Okay, fine, keep it up, Jensen. But basically, there are 4 cloud companies that buy $1 jillion worth of chips a year right now, and you can name them. So these 4 cloud companies compete mightily, and they all are trying to build out this crazy size new data centers using GPU chips. Congratulations all around. And this is changing the complexion of everything because all those companies want to make their own chips. They're not really happy paying that much money to NVIDIA. So it's really interesting to see what's happening with the first time in my lifetime where we're going from what was an Intel world to an Intel AMD world to an Intel AMD Qualcomm world to an Intel AMD Qualcomm ARM world with Broadcom coming in, and then suddenly it's going to multiply that by 5. It's really an interesting time. So I think it's really good for the industry and for us in the West that we've got a lot of new kids on the block. Some of them are the cloud customers. Some of them are like Cerebras, where they're just out of whole cloth. Many of them, if not all of them, are driven by the idea of trying to serve AI somehow or other. Hopefully not all for LLMs, which are flawed, but certainly for AI. And this is great. So whether they're inference engines or whether they're discovery engines or whether they're LLM related or something else, DeepMind related, fantastic. Keep it up. And it's going to be healthy for everyone. It'll bring more
Except
jobs.
maybe NVIDIA.
Pardon?
I said except maybe NVIDIA.
NVIDIA is going to be fine. They may have to slow down a little bit, but that's good news for NVIDIA because you can't keep doing the same thing at the rate they've been doing it. A soft landing for NVIDIA would be a happy story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's chips. It's really exciting. It's really good news. Let's get away from having all of our intellectual property 15 yards off the Chinese coast and be a little smarter than that. So we will.
All right, let's talk about AI.
AI. Well, as you know, Berit, and I think many of our members know, the term AI is a bit too broad to really discuss intelligently. But if you break it out into areas, it's a lot simpler. And one thing that is pretty clear to me is that if you broke out the large language model arena, which is essentially the OpenAI story and all of the activity around that, um, certainly there will be things that that's good for and things that it's not good for. But the wholesale adoption of that for everything is already a fail. That's a fail. And as much as Sam Altman would like to make us think it's not true, it is true. And so the result there is you're going to see a sequestration, I think, of that technology, that part of AI, into where it's going now. So making movies, the arts, marketing plans, book outlines, speech help, co-pilots for things that people are doing themselves, like coding, all that kind of thing. But nothing where human life is at stake. And probably nothing where the enterprise is at stake if it makes a mistake, because that technology is mistake ridden and there's no way to get rid of it, despite what you may be hearing anywhere else. And so then there are other parts of AI, which what's next, right? So there are things that are really cool. Certainly, AlphaFold 3 is cool. That's great. Learning how to fold proteins for purpose is great. That's a separate type of technology which uses neural nets, but also uses some other types of things that DeepMind guys came up with in London long ago and have been improving, beginning with video games. And then there's what we call discovery engines. I'm biased here. As you mentioned, I'm running a company called Pattern, which is based on making pattern discovery engines, but there's no fail to it. And that's important. So trust and transparency are nowhere to be found in LLMs, in AI, but are easy to find if you separate yourself from that world and build new engines. Fine, do that. And I believe the world's going to turn heavily toward that as it becomes clear that the enterprises are rejecting what really matters as an area where you want to have LLMs practiced.
So I want to ask you a question,
Yeah.
which is I was reading an interesting report from Ethan Mollick this morning about a new type of LLM that apparently thinks before it gives a response. And the
Mhm.
results from those have apparently been significantly more useful or impressive or dependable, however you want to frame that.
I would be
And I'm
careful.
just wondering if you have comments on those things.
Yeah,
That's his interpretation.
right.
I don't personally know. So I'm just curious about your thoughts on that. If you've
I would
looked
say
into
the Valley machine continues to search for an answer that does not exist. However, will they keep improving LLMs? Yes. And they will advertise every improvement, and they should. And so taking more time, taking more cycles, introducing delays or doing more cycles per answer, which is what we're talking about here, I think,
Mhm.
to get a better answer, fine. Does it have anything to do with reducing hallucinations? No. So it's not more dependable. But what? So here's where they're trying to go. I think is agents. And if you wanted to bring agents, which is where a lot of the activity is now, the inference inference engines at the edge. I have kind of an IoT story, and then agents where AI is given the job of dealing with you, Barrett, not with dealing with the physics of the cosmos or how to run an autonomous vehicle in the sky, but how to convince you that whatever. And guess you know what? No offense to anybody in this call, but that's plain easy. If you ask AI to manipulate people, that is just plain easy compared to figuring out why the speed of light is what it is, or how to make a protein actually create a drug, not just fold. And so, well, interesting. And that's where a huge amount of energy is going now. So all the people are talking about agency and agents as the future of AI in the moment. And it's frightening because the good news is um, people talk to AI as their friend and they don't have a friend. That's nice. Um, Maybe for senior people to have robots at home that can talk to them, that's great. But the bad news would be if they are manipulating people. We've now heard stories of teenagers committing suicide because their agent told them to, or going after their parents in some violent way because of the same thing. This is not a surprise. This is because there are no guardrails possible ultimately that can prevent hallucinations or failure. And this is a very, very dangerous technology. So I don't want anyone to think that the BS that comes out of the Valley hype machine for whatever new feature set takes away the risk. It doesn't. It might buy them more money, but it doesn't take away the risk.
All right, let's talk about energy.
Yeah. Interesting moment, because I would say that the people who should know about this, like even the oil companies, are way behind the ball, at least for the last month. A month ago, the International Energy Agency came out with a big report saying, because China's slowing down in their domestic consumption of energy, therefore you're all in trouble. Prices will go down, et cetera, et cetera. Too many supplies. I don't think the people on that committee know about technology, because if they did, they would know we're about to go through the world's largest demand for new energy requirements ever. And that's why Microsoft did a deal with 3 Mile Island. It wasn't because they loved to have 3 Mile Island as a buddy. It's because they had not that many choices. So get ready for the biggest energy demand in history as everyone builds out worldwide, builds out new data centers for which there is no current supply of water or energy. Wow. I don't think anybody's got an answer for this. And that's why there is a gigantic gold rush going on for what supplies there are of water and energy, but isn't enough, as far as I can tell. So we will make a lot more energy. The amount of energy being created will go way up. The amount of price will be the middle of that supply demand curve, but the demand is going to be huge. And if the International Energy Agency can't figure this out, you can assume that Exxon just went into the power business 2 weeks ago. That should be the big tell, because they've always said they would never do that. And now they're going to be in the power business. Why is that? This is why. So get ready for a really big revolution, even in the oil and gas companies and all that crowd, because they recognize the problems they're facing. They can't wait on permitting from some grid somewhere. They've got to have their own grid and their own power supplies to take care of these data centers, and it's going to be a gigantic build out.
All right, healthcare.
Healthcare is back to what we just talked about with AI. So healthcare to me is where the rubber meets the road, bad saying, but it matters in healthcare. We'll see LLMs taking over things like marketing, or maybe operations in a clinic, streamlining operation. That's okay. But whenever you hear the words drug discovery from an AI person, ask them, "Oh, that's great news, Bob," or whatever your name is. "And how many new drugs has your company created?" None. That's zero. So, and then you say, "Well, then, shut up for a while. Just shut up." And so, I don't know. At Pattern, my favorite slide is where Pattern has, I think, 7 now of top drugs against the top 5 cancers, and Google has none, and OpenAI has none, and Microsoft has none, and on and on and on. They all have none. There's zero. So healthcare is the place where lives are most at risk, and therefore where you least want a non-transparent, non-trustworthy version of AI to be helping you out or your family. And doctors pretty much know this. So despite all the hype coming off the Valley, I think this is where, if you're looking for a good read on the truth about AI, you can look to healthcare in general, and you'll find more true statements from inside healthcare and more BS from outside of healthcare. And you can sort them easily. Goats over here, wheat and chaff over here. Really bad metaphor. So that's where healthcare is. Great things will happen through new things. I'll just say discovery engines again. There are going to be a lot of new things coming down the pike in AI that are not based on flawed technology, and they will have direct contributions to healthcare, and that'll be a great thing for everybody involved.
I want to bring up another pattern that I've been watching or paying attention to in healthcare, which is private equity taking over healthcare.
Yeah.
And that's its potential impact on essentially, you've been talking about innovation, healthcare innovation, but the impact of private equity on American healthcare in general, I think, is pushing it downward and further and further and further downward, right?
Yes, that's right.
Because all of these hospitals are having their assets sold out from underneath them. They're not able to maximize actual client care or patient care. And they're being forced to cut more and more and more costs to become more and more and more profitable. So I think that's a trend that we're going to see continuing. I don't see any reason that will stop under the next administration, right? Or be reined in under the next administration.
No, I don't think so. I think you're right. And it's sad. People people in Wall Street know what private equity is all about. It's about taking over a company, selling off all the stuff that matters, taking all the cash out of it you can, leveraging it up to the neck in debt, and then dumping it. Now they've tried to escape that reputation, but it's still basically the same story. So if you've got somebody whose whole idea is capturing your recurring revenues and taking that benefit for themselves and selling off what's left, how's that going to help healthcare? And that's what PE is all about. That's how they pick their investment targets is what's your ARR? What are your recurring revenues? And that, if they're not any use to them, they're not going to touch you no matter who you are. So they try to sell themselves as the new venture guys. They're
Right.
not the new venture guys. They're the old PE guys.
Yeah, they're moving into more and more and more fields, I think is the difference. Like
They
the
are.
model is not new, but the application of that model is new and the ways in which it's being applied to things that have previously been considered more services.
You are absolutely right. And it's not going to lead to better care for anybody.
I think we're going to expect that to
Yeah.
continue on a downward trajectory.
Yeah. That's right. I think the opposite could be done if you really wanted to improve the American healthcare system. Everything you just said, Barrett, just flip that. That would be better. So uh, different investors, different goals, more home ownership. That would be much better and more accountability.
Okay, so that's our initial list of landscapes. Anything else you want to say before you dive into predictions?
No, I think we've kind of covered the world like Sherwin-Williams so far. So we've probably given people enough stuff to argue about for an hour, even before we get to the predictions, if that's our goal.
All right.
So should we do our top
So
10?
I think in that case, it's time for you to reveal your top 10 predictions for 2025.
All right. And so members who have been around us for a little while know that we don't get chatty during this part of the event because we'll have to live and die by these things about a year from now. And so word choice actually matters. And so number one.
Wait, before you start, I just want to
Yes.
say to everyone so that they're aware, you will be receiving these in your inbox at the conclusion of this event. So don't feel like you need to take copious notes throughout if you don't want to.
Good point.
See some people looking at yeah.
And I'll mention that these are different in nature from what you may be used to as an SNS member because of how the world has changed in this last 12 months. And so I didn't feel good just telling you tech things at a time when tech things alone are not the primary driver of what's happening in 2025. They're important, but they're not. 5 years ago they would have been everything. Right now they're not everything. All right, number one, we will see a breakout in the number and types of major chip makers as AI becomes the top market motivator. The result is an explosion in competition unlike any seen in the chip world to date. Intel suffers, ARM grows, Qualcomm surfs the wave, and NVIDIA keeps blowing up, but faces the hazards that lurk behind pure GPT vulnerability and dependency. Number two, big tech continues its consolidation plays under the Trump administration, now unhindered by Biden and Khan in the US or by Margrethe Vestager in the EU. The big tech firms, already bigger than most countries, will achieve a level of size and multi-level exponential growth not only previously unseen, but also unimagined by most. The real story is their competition with one another, as all of the top four, Google, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, try to do it all and get it all. Number three, global warming continues its human and financial cost as insurers and reinsurers back out of markets and major catastrophes increase. Solar is the key, wind second, and the build-out accelerates as all nations come to the same conclusion. Number four, there will be no AGI from GPT. The blush is off the compost pile, really bad metaphor, for generative AI, GAI, and GPT. Even as the hype wave continues, the red line turns redder between what users and buyers will and will not tolerate regarding the failure modes of this hyper-hyped technology. People hallucinating about OpenAI's artificial general intelligence, AGI, dreams will be relegated to a similar fate as that of Dylan Thomas's uncles in the back room during Christmas parties. That's a reference to all Child's Christmas in Wales for those who don't know that. Number five, Elon mania will become less manic. Those who hate will get somewhat tired of hating, and those who appreciate will not be surprised at new successes. His companies will continue to grow, and whatever the grand plan is will continue to be revealed. Being the richest person will dwindle in importance into the background compared with the scale of his growing number of major achievements, both alone and often integrated together. Number six, the world moves from the sentimental to the utilitarian. It becomes a tougher, more pragmatic place based on what it is versus one's personal TikTok celebrity dreams. War replaces peace, and brutal efficiency replaces dreamy hope in many parts of the globe. The gloves are coming off on every side. Number seven, CRINK continues its prosecution of World War III on all fronts. This is not a replay of the Cold War. It is a hot war on all fronts worldwide. Iran is defanged militarily. Russia's Ukraine war has made it an economic basket case, captive to Chinese and North Korean interests. China goes into desperation mode as its domestic economy continues its long crash and its export attack falls short of its needs. Xi may have to fall back on the military or the diversion of expansion. Number eight, countries worldwide accelerate their efforts to protect children from the internet. Now all they have to do is the same for adults. And number nine, China cars dominate the global market everywhere but in the US, as the Chinese export attack uses both gas and EVs as the sharp point of this general export spear. Massive market gains are made in South Asia and in emerging nations, accompanied by gains against entrenched competitors in the EU, the UK, and elsewhere. China's expansion of the Mexico market is breathtaking in preparation for an ultimate attack on the US. And number 10, agents spawned by GPT and GAI will be everywhere, falling into these categories. Agents helping humans? Yes, and good. Agents manipulating humans? Yes, and very bad. Agents, quote, as smart as a new intern, unquote, hollow out the middle-class workforce and increase financial income gaps. And that is the top 10. Berit, back to you.
All
Yeah.
right, that is all we have time for today. Thank you everyone for joining us. I want to remind you that I mentioned our next Spark Salon, January 30th. Hope to see many of you there. We will be having a Future in Review in June 8th through 11th at UC San Diego, the Qualcomm Institute. And we hope to see many of you there.